welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is a special guest, Dr. Yerevan Saeed, who is an in-residence scholar at School for International Service at the American University, where he's a Director of Global Kurdish Initiative for Peace. He is also affiliated with the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. And he is with us to discuss a very fraught and emotional topic, the history and aftermath of the Halabja gas attack by Saddam Hussein against the Kurdish population, which has had a lasting impact to this day. And Dr. Saeed is one of the survivors of this attack. But as horrible as that event was, and as important it is to remember history, what happened after, the fact that there was no real justice for the survivors and the families of the victims, is just as important to discuss, especially in light of the current events and challenges facing the Kurdish population, both in Iraq and in the region and as a whole. Thank you so much, Dr. Saeed, for joining us today. If you could share with the audience a few words about yourself, your background, your experiences, and how you came to be teaching and talking about Kurdish issues in general and the Halabja massacre, genocide as well.
Sure. My name is Yerevan Saeed, and I'm from Halabja, infamous for the 1988 chemical attack by the state of Iraq. It was the biggest or the largest chemical attack against the civilian populations in the last century, and actually even today, it has remained the largest civilian, the largest chemical attack against the civilian populations by the government, by our supposedly our own government against us, and it resulted in the killing of over 5,000 people, wounding 10,000 more. And up to the moment we're speaking, it's over 36 years over the chemical attack on Halabja, but still hundreds, if not thousands, of people are directly suffering from the aftermath of the attack, in the term of suffering from lung disease, asthma, and other health problems, but also tens of thousands of other people are suffering psychologically because they lost their family members, their relatives, their friends, their neighbors. So that has left lasting impact on the collective psyche of not just people in Halabja, but also the Kurdish people, and also those people who are aware of the Kurdish history in the Middle East.
Well, I think the unfortunate part is, despite the vastness of this horrific situation, most people are not today are not really aware of what happened. In fact, even after the U.S. invasion and of Iraq and the removal of Saddam Hussein, many issues were hotly discussed at the time, whether or not Iraq retained WMDs, whether democracy was preferable to authoritarianism, and what consequences it would bring to the region. But actually, the situation with the Kurds remained very much in the background and was not that much part of the discussion. And frankly, even in the aftermath, the Kurdish voices, while certainly part of the forum on the formation of the new government, were not very much at the forefront of international media coverage. And I think one of the problems is that as this important situation faded from memory, the personal accounts, the personal experiences of individuals affected by this horrific atrocity have likewise um, escaped grasp of the public and public understanding. So it would be great if you could tell us a little bit more about your personal experiences and just give us a sense of that period of time and how it all came about to begin with.
Sure, but unfortunately, because Halabja is just, on the border with Iran, it has always been a place where really riddled with conflict, whether it was because of the it was a hotbed for the Kurdish insurgency because it's surrounded with mountain. It was just, very easy for for Kurds to rebel against, successive Iraqi governments because that has been always the case for the Kurds because we did not want to live under a government that was not ours, since we were forcibly put under these, various, governments in the Middle East by the French, by the British, and by these colonial powers. In after the World War II, we have rebelled, we have revolted against all these governments, whether it was in Iraq, in Syria, in Iran, and also in Turkey. And Halabja, because of its geography and also topography, very mountainous, and also people were very aware of who they were, and also people were very nationalistic. People were very educated. They wanted to govern themselves, but therefore, Halabja really, have always led, Kurdish insurgency, or has been always a part of the Kurdish revolution against, all these successive governments. And also, remember, 1988 was not the only time that, Iraq attacked Halabja. Actually, in 1987, Iraq, attacked Halabja, arrested, hundreds of people, massacred like a number of people, razed it to the ground, a large neighborhood of Halabja. It was 1987, for example, where for the first time I became a refugee, I and my family, and also hundreds of other, families from Halabja. We were forced to leave Halabja and fled to Iran, and we became a refugee for the first time in our life. At that time, my dad was a fugitive from the Iraqi army because he did not believe in Iraq. He did not believe in the Iraqi army. He had fled, from the army. He didn't want to fight for a country he never believed in, and therefore, this belief and conviction of Kurdish nationalism and Kurdish patriotism, and we are Kurdistan, the Iraqi has always been instilled in our mind and also in our heart. So we fled to Iran. We embarked on a very dangerous journey through landmine, through mountain, through border guards, checkpoints. We had to walk and do this very dangerous journey in the dead of night so that the Iraqi troops would not see us. Then we made it to the other side of the border where we were received by the Iranians. And what is interesting, what is very tragic about the reality of the Kurds in the Middle East, while we Kurds from Iraq were trying to escape and flee to Iran, there were other Kurds from Iran who were trying to flee from Iran coming to Iraq. So you can see all these irony and also paradoxes in the lives of the Kurds where we're so confused in our own land and also our own ancestral land because of what happened to us, because of what really the British and these great powers did to us, geopolitical interests and of these great powers superseded, the lives and also interests of people like Kurds in the Middle East, even though we're called minority. The fact is we're not minority. We're talking about the 40 million people at the moment in the Middle East who are stateless. Okay, if we are one people, we're majority, and other people who are controlling this status, in fact, will become minority. But coming back to my original point where I was talking about my experience. So in 1987, for the first time, I became refugee, and then after a few months, we were in Yerevan. My family was worried about our education. My father and also had to smuggle me and my younger brother into Iraq again through the same very dangerous route and road, and live as me and my brother with my grandparents, so that we'd go to school, and he had to go back again to Iran and stay there. So at that time I remember I was in the second I was a second grader, and my brother was the first grader. It was a very hard time for us, because being away from your family was really not easy. There was no communication, there was no social media or any type of phone, whatever. You had no any means to communicate with them at all. So, but finally, my family decided to come back to Iraq in February of 1988. After they pay a ransom to the Iraqi government, they paid about $3,000 in 1988, so that they would not be prosecuted and they would not be arrested. But unfortunately, just 3 weeks after they came back to Iraq from Iran, we had to flee again to Iran because of the attack, the chemical attack of 1988. But we were kind of lucky, because my father really understood the brutality of the Iraqi regime, and he thought that the Iraqi military is going to retaliate against the population when the Iranian invaded into the city of Halabja and occupied it on the 14th and 15th of March. We left the town on the evening of March 15th. We went to our village after a 45-minute walk, and then we stayed there for a few hours there. Then at the dead of night, we were awakened up, me and my brother, and so along with the other family, and then we started another leg of our journey to the caves around Halabja. After I think 2 hours, if I'm not mistaken, we arrived in the caves in the dawn on March 16, 1988. And then we heard, the sounds of the Iraqi military, jets. They were coming, they were bombing, Halabja, and also the mountains, all these areas. Probably it was 10 in the morning. We heard all these sounds of bombs. At first, they used napalm bombs because they wanted people would go to the basements, the reason for that, because the chemical gas, the gas they use is heavier than air, and also it just sinks, and they wanted people to go to the basement, and these basements were of course underground. They were under the houses, so many people unfortunately went and sheltered in these basements to avoid being killed by the napalm bombs. And after they lured the Iraqi government or the Iraqi state military, lured people into this basement. Then they started dropping the chemical bombs into Halabja, and also in the other areas as well. That's where many people died in the basement. It became the chamber of death for thousands of people. And then the Iraqi state was so like, brutal, like, consider, like, these, like, this state followed people. And like, the main roads, like, leading outside to Halabja, like, many people try to escape from the town naturally. And they followed people, hunted people, and dropped chemical bombs on the main roads. That's where, again, many people died. They even detected that, people were hiding in the cave in the mountains. That's where they dropped the chemical bombs on the, for example, the mountains and the caves that we were, seeking shelter. And we saw them, like, the smog and everything. We thought that it was the fighter, like, jet that crashed it. But we know then real, we felt some, our eyes, felt somehow, like, like teary, but we used, like, towels. And also we were in a higher elevation. Probably were lucky that we avoided the worst affected by the chemical, gas. And also in 1991, when we returned to Halabja, we realized that one of the chemical gas had not exploded exactly on the cave that we had, sought shelter. And then probably in the afternoon of March 16, 1988, then realized that, all these, people had died. It felt like, as it was the end of the world, or, apocalypse, was, we were, like, experiencing that when we saw many people were coming towards us, toward the mountains. People had lost their sight. Some people were burned, and, other people has lost their sanity. They had gone crazy. So amid of, like, screams of the people. So it was a very, very terrible, experience. And for whatever reason, we stayed in the caves for a number of days. And actually, I checked it with my dad, how long we stayed in the caves, because at that time I was only 8 years old, and he told me that we stayed until, like, 24th of March, until the Iranian troops came and discovered us. And they said, what the hell you are doing here? Because everyone had left the city, either dead or alive. And we started the second, probably the third leg of our journey again through mud and mountain, and also, hoping that we would not be detected by, the Iraqi military, fighter jets, because they were coming and, circling around the sky of Halabja. They were still, like, trying to find people, bomb and kill, the last, people who were, like, clinging, holding to life, even those who had survived this horrible, like, chemical attack. So after 5 hours of walking, we arrived at another village on the border with Iran. We stayed there overnight, and then we were told that we had to cross a river, and there was only one very, like, small bridge the Iranian troops had built it to cross into the other side to the Iraqi side. But Iraqi, like, military had even followed, like, the people of Halabja even to the last point of the border. They had bombed people and killed many people on that, bridge as well. We were told, that you can go, but it will be very dangerous. You could be killed on that, very last point. So we tried and we made it, but when we made our crossing across the border, we got separated from our father. So me, my brothers and my mom were in a different car, and also my father was in a different track. And then we ended up in a different shelters in Iran. And probably after a few weeks, and after trying to through inquiries and also words of mouth. Then we found one another. We really didn't know what had happened to one another, and we're quite concerned, and we expected the worst. And then after a while, then we were transferred to an official refugee camp in the Kermanshah province in Iran, where we stayed until 1989. And then the Iraqi government issued a general amnesty for people who had fled the country. Obviously, we were criminalized at that time. And then we were promised that we would go back to Halabja, but that was not the case. As soon as we were transferred to the Iraqi military, to the Iraqi authority, we were put onto the military tracks. And then we were, taken to a small town outside of the city of Suleimania, where we were registered in a very open, field. And then we were again, we're put into these military tracks, and then we're taken to another open, field, but really there was nothing. There was no water. There was no sanitation. There was no food. There was nothing for us. We were just surrounded by Iraqi military troops who did not speak our language. They didn't allow us to do anything. They were just there to confine and make sure that we're not getting out of this horrible place. But after a few days, my auntie's husband was able to find us, locate us, and also smuggle out of that horrible place. But we were even not able to rent a house because we were from Halabja. The Iraqi government had issued a directive that you cannot rent a house to people from Halabja. And even I remember my mom took me and my brothers to schools to get enrolled to multiple schools, and we were denied education just because we're from Halabja. Then she had to go around all this craziness and this very systematic discrimination. We had to get some sort of a fake internally displaced identification card. Obviously we had to alter our origins and where we came from so that we get enrolled into school. So it was a very really heart wrenching experience for all of us because it was not just easy. I'm talking about 1989. I was only 9 years old. To see all kids go to school daily in front of your eyes, and you're not being able to go to school was not an easy thing.
This sounds like a completely horrifying experience, and I'm sure that amidst all this chaos, there is also, first of all, obviously there are concern for your life and for things going forward. Also, probably a lot of confusion about what happened to family, friends, your colleagues, and so forth. What were the, after all this was over and after the amnesty was imposed and survivors essentially returned, or whoever returned to these very different locations, was there any way to kind of find and keep in touch with other Halabja exiles, or was it or was this communication permanently severed?
So when we were in the refugee camp, all the people were from Halabja, but when we came back, it was when we came back to Iraq, we were scattered across a big city, and we're close to our family, and we were so we were in contact with our immediate extended family to some extent. But most of the people from Halabja were taken, and they were not allowed to live in the city. They were taken to some sort of a concentration camp. They were restricted. their movement and everything was restricted. There was like, they were under watch and protection, not in a good sense, but protection in the sense to restrict them and confine them and just one specific way to make sure that these people will not get out. So there were like some sort of on a maximum like security zone in Erbil province. It was called Bahraka. They were there until 1991 after the Kurdish uprising. Then they returned to Halabja. So that was the situation. Like even people were not allowed to return to Halabja, and even were not allowed to return to Halabja. And after 1991, when the Kurds rose up against the Iraqi government or the Iraqi state, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and the coalition forces ejected Saddam, Iraq became weak. As a result of that, Kurds took the opportunity and then we were able to free ourselves. We went back to Halabja and Halabja was in a complete devastation. I'm talking about like a town. We left it. It was all alive and beautiful and all trees and houses and full of life. And when we went back, the Iraqi military had use the TNT to explode every house, every school, every hospital, every institution. Everything was completely destroyed. Like, I remember like everything was rubble. It was more than what you see in the documentary, like, films that shows, for example, Germany or like, France and in the World War II, like how it's like completely devastated. It's really worse than that because this was a systematic destruction of a town where the Iraqi military had all explosives that they wanted, and also all the planning and expertise. They use it and destroyed the whole town. So when we went back there and even there was no street, there was really nothing. Everything was complete rubble. And it was a very hard time, very difficult, very daunting. And that's where we, start rebuilding our lives. And, school and everything were just, sitting on the ground, when there was rain and we were under all these broken roofs and walls. When we were studying, there was no textbook. There were no teachers. Like there were like volunteer teachers. I remember even like there were like 2 or 3 classes were put into one. Like for example, first, second, and third graders into one classroom, just to teach us all. I don't know how that worked. I'm sometimes trying to reflect it on all of these things and also how we finished school, how we rebuilt that town, and how we got there. It just kind of really miracle. Speaking of resilience and hope, and that's why during the 36th anniversary of Halabja, I really dedicated some part of my speech to about speaking about resilience and also hope. Of the Kurdish people and especially the city of Halabja, because when you really reflect it back on where we came and on where we are now, it's just a miracle.
It's kind of appalling when you come back and everything is in ruins. Where do people even stay? Did they commute to some nearby village and then came back from there to rebuild things? Were they in tent cities outside? Where did you actually stay during this reconstruction process?
So many people really, most of these like houses were like destroyed or half destroyed. People were just gone and probably like rebuilt like one or half half a room, something like that, and then that's where they start rebuilding their house and everything. And then we had to dig out, the whole street just to clear up so that we can walk. There was, it took like probably like, a few years, at least like, 4 years for the streets of Halabja to be cleared up, to take out just the rubble. We still have like, houses that have not been rebuilt. Yeah? So we still have like, our village is completely like, it's still like, in complete rubble. It has not been rebuilt. There are a few houses that have been rebuilt, but it has been there. And even I suggested that it should be turned into some sort of museum so that people will understand the brutality of the Iraqi state. We should not rebuild it. It's still, in my view, we should, make that and also probably fence it around or turn it into some sort of a live museum, a symbol of the Iraqi brutality against the Kurdish people, and also especially again the people of Halabja, so that the people will understand what we have gone through and also what this really state represents.
So let's take a step back from those events and go back to the previous history of, you mentioned the British and the French dividing up the Middle East and excluding the Kurds from the state building agreements with the other local tribes and groups. What exactly happened? How did the Kurds and why did the Kurds got cut out so completely, despite the fact that they're fairly a significant portion of the local populations?
So after so you have various treaties signed by the European powers, rival powers. They covered up the Ottoman Empire that best suited and served their strategic interests, that economic, that included geopolitical, political, and so economic interests in the Middle East. And that started with the Sykes-Picot agreement of 1916, and then you have the Science, Remo of 1922. Then you have a civil agreement where the Kurds were really given their own homeland, but the problem was, the Turkey under Kemal Atatürk was able to revive and also fight against the European powers, and the European powers, especially the British at that time, was tired and fatigued of wars, and it was the treasury was running out of money. They didn't want to fight. They just wanted to give whatever Turkey wanted, and then the new Turkey promised complete abolitions of the Ottoman Empire, Islam not to be a part of the state anymore. It will be a complete secular state, but they wanted, Kurdistan not to be a state, but rather to, to be, incorporated into part of Turkey. And then you have the Treaty of Lausanne, 1923, if I'm not mistaken, then replaces the Treaty of Sevres. Then the dream of a Kurdish state will be dashed forever. And since the Kurds have been fighting these various stages, this doesn't mean that the Kurds did not try. We did try, and in 1948 we have the the Republic of Kurdistan in Mahabad, and this was into the Kurdistan of Iran, and it had lots of support. And Kurds from Iraq and from Turkey and from other places, they all went and supported this new Republic of Kurdistan. But unfortunately, again, and that became the victim of geopolitics. The Soviets and the British and the American, they had a treaty and then you know, it collapses. That's the problem with the Kurd, you know, with the Kurdistan, because you really need a foreign power protection, because Kurdistan is very landlocked. You have all these foreign powers, for like all these neighbors who are more powerful than you. Unless you have a protection, it's very, very hard. And now it becomes more and more problematic. Therefore, like you know, the Kurdish experience is becoming. Many people see it as some sort, like, you know, Kurds, okay, they always talk about victimhood, but this is really not about victimhood. We are we are product of structural victimization on state level, on regional level, also international level. On international level, you have all these treaties against us, against our will. We were never consulted. They never come to us and tell us, okay, this is what's going to happen to you. Do you agree? They never consulted, or you know, consult us at all. So you have that, and then on the regional level, you have all these powerful states, and they're being constantly supported by the international system, and you can't do much about it. And then on the state level, you have, you know, sovereignty, you know, bestowed by the United Nations, and all these all these, you know, the current, you know, international system is so biased against, you know, for example, secessionist movements, or those you know, people who are trying to have a new state. It's almost impossible for the Kurds to try to break up, you know, today's you know, system that has been entangled with, really, because, you know, that's a chain that has been put in our hands. You know, whatever we do, we cannot do anything about it. And I think it was last year on the anniversary of Lausanne, I wrote, okay, we tried to have a state, we were not allowed, and that was in 2017. The whole world really stood up against us. You know, our American friends, they stood up against us. They said, okay, it's not the time for you to have a state. Iran, you know, stood up against us. Turkey, Iraq, everyone. You know, the irony is, even Iran and the United States, even though they are rivals and arch enemies in the Middle East and also on the global affairs, but when it comes to the Kurds, they are so united, it's almost unbelievable. And when it came to the Kurdish, you know, Kurdish independence in referendum in September of 2017, you know, they were on the same line. They were against Kurdistan region independence referendum. So my argument in the piece was, for the Washington Institute, is, okay, so if we are not given statehood, then we should be given an equal right within the framework of the current status where the Kurds are. Okay, we should not go through what we have gone through in the last century. We do not deserve to go through all these genocides. Okay, so for many people in the last century, they have gone only through one genocide. For the Kurds, as for example, just in Iraqi Kurdistan, we have gone through multiple genocides. So we're talking about Kurds in Iraq, for example, almost a decade of genocide, like systematic genocide by the Iraqi state since 1980 until September of 1988. So you're not just, is it not just confined to one time or one place? You're talking about this relentless, you know, genocide campaign by the Iraqi state. That just, you know, in Iraq, for example, in Turkey, it was the same thing. In other places, like the Kurds, for example, in Syria, they were not citizens, and they had no any identity. They had nothing in Syria, for example. So okay, if we are not given the state, if we cannot have our own country, then we should be able to have equal citizenship, just like others. And because it does not make any sense. Like, the Kurds was 40 million people in the Middle East, bigger than most of the other ethnic groups that currently have their own status. Why we should not have at least the opportunity to be equal with the other people?
What exactly was it about Saddam Hussein's Iraq that caused this specific focus, an unrelenting focus on the Kurds? And what was it that was it just an issue of dividing and conquering for the sake of Saddam Hussein staying in power, or were there other reasons for this relentless persecution? And by the way, all of this coincided with the Iraq-Iran war, which went on for 8 years. How did that, if at all, impact this whole situation?
It did impact it, but the problem is that, like, the Iraqi oppression against the Kurds was not just during the Saddam Hussein, but also it started, like, from 1922 when Iraq started. And also at that time, even the British, started helping the newly established the Iraqi state. The British, the Royal Air Force even was used against, suppressing the Kurdish revolution and insurgencies when we were asking for our rights in various, parts of Kurdistan. And even in Halabja, like, the Royal Air Force was used to suppress, people of Halabja when we stood up against, the British, for example, and we defeated them. In fact, they suffered one of the, worst defeat in Iraq, in Halabja area. But so in 1920s it was like that, in 1930s it was like that, in 1940s, in 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And now, even now, we are just going back to the same thing because, okay, in the last probably, like, after 2023 to 2020, 2013, 2013 was okay, because the British, the American international coalition was there. As long as there's like a foreign guarantor where the Kurds are protected, it is fine, it's working. But as long as that foreign guarantor is gone, then things will go back and relapse into the former state, and that's very, very dangerous. And now what you have in Iraq is really going back to the same and relapsing into the same old state. And by that, I mean, like, all the hard-won, political, constitutional, legal, achievements we have gotten in the past. Now they're just, reversing. The Iraqi government is just trying to clamp down on the Kurdish achievement. They're, cutting down whatever they can. They are weaponizing the court to undermine the Kurdistan region's federalism and autonomy. They're cutting, the budget. They have, stopped the Kurdistan region from exporting oil. They are using divide and rule. They have caused a lot of factionalism and division within the Kurdistan region. So they are doing these, like, very dirty politics. This is not to blame ourselves. Of course, we also, play along with it, unfortunately, because, some of the Kurdish parties are not helping either. But we are divided as well. But they're not helping. Instead of Iraq to learn from the past mistakes, instead of trying to resolve the Kurdish issues, instead of trying to implement the constitution that everyone agreed in 2005, they're trying to undermine the constitution. They're trying to use the power because the Iraq is, like, stronger, the Kurds are more divided. They're just trying to do, like, the past thing. And also this is just a recipe for more instability, for conflict, for more trouble in the future.
All of this is horrific. It's terrible. What is amazing is that in 1998, when the original thing happened, and that is after you said a whole series of other massacres and human rights violations, where was the international community? I mean, I understand there were some genocide resolutions and so forth, but what was the actual impact and what was the international response?
In 1988, unfortunately, there was not much response at that time. Um, at that time, especially if we're talking about, the US and the Reagan administration, there were lots of hawkers. They were very anti-Iranians, and every policy was driven by anti-Iranians. So the enemy of enemies is my friend. This is not to say like, America was in love with Saddam, but they didn't like Iran either. So they thought like Saddam was a lesser of the two evil. They wanted to support Saddam to stop the Iranian revolution spreading to the rest of the Arab world, and so they thought he could provide some sort of a protection in this regard. So unfortunately, the Kurds, as usual, became the pawn in this geopolitical game, and the result of that, Halabja and all these chemical attacks, because Halabja just was the biggest incident, of course, but Iraq used chemical attacks across the Kurdistan region. At least 60 other incidents have been documented in across Kurdistan region, and 49 of them after the Iraq-Iran war stopped. So after the truce between Iraq and Iran war, and Iraq just systematically used chemical attack to exterminate the Kurdish population in Kurdistan region. So, but we had some really good friends, especially like people like Peter Galbraith, today's Maryland, Senator Chris Van Hollen. They risked everything. They came to Turkey. They documented. At that time, they were working on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and that became the foundation for the 1988 preventions of genocide. They wanted to sanction Saddam Hussein. The legislation passed the Senate, I think the House as well, but fortunately, the Reagan administration, I think they vetoed or they defeated the legislation. But eventually they were forced to come out, and they condemned the Halabja attack. The State Department did eventually, and gradually all this really became pressure mounted on Iraq. But it was not until Iraq or Saddam Hussein invaded Iraq, then things change, and the tide turned against Saddam Hussein. Also, then the Bush administration had no choice but to condemn it, and then Kurds became beneficiary of that, I would say. But also there's something else really I want to mention. Unfortunately, even some academics and some think tankers at that time, especially in 1986 1988, there were I don't know, there was some sort of like moral bankruptcy within these academics. Now I'm reading their accounts. They were writing in support of Saddam Hussein. They were thinking that Saddam was a democratic leader. They were thinking, okay, Halabja massacre and atrocity was not sufficient for the United States not to improve relations with Saddam Hussein and Iraq and the US. They were advocating for a better relationship with Saddam Hussein. And unfortunately, these people are still around, and I don't know how they can live with themselves, really.
Well, that brings me to a question, which is immediately after the fall of Saddam Hussein, why wasn't that a great opportunity to kind of create either, a Kurdish state, at least in the Iraqi portion of the country? Because at that point, you did not have a dictator anymore. The Iranians had not yet gotten as much control over, influence in politics as they have currently. And so it was a good opportunity for everyone to go their separate ways, and without, mitigate the potential for future disaster. So why had that not? Why was there no push for that at the time?
Okay, the problem with the Kurds is like, again, the Europeans have created the mess for the Kurds, and the structure problems they have created for us so difficult to get out. It's almost impossible. Like the problem with the Kurds is not just one state that we have to fight, but four states. Even if we don't have to fight with them, even if we have to go and beg them and convince them, we have to go and convince four states, not just like one state we have to convince. We have to go to Ankara, we have to go to Damascus, we have to go to Tehran, we have to go to Baghdad, all of four states. And in 1991, for example, yes, true, uprising, and it was a good opportunity, especially at that time. It was the fall of the Soviet Union. The whole, Eastern Europe became independent. All these new states were popping up, Central Asia as well. You had, many states, at least 20 more states becoming independent. There was a wave of new independent states, and Kurdistan was a very good geopolitical opportunity probably. But the problem is that you have Turkey. Turkey was against everything Kurdish, and even it was against the Kurdish, uprising. And also Turkey is a member of NATO, and Turkey has lots of geopolitical, economic, also military, interests with the United States and also with European countries. They don't want to offend Turkey. So lots of factors really play in the Kurdish factor when it comes to independent. So it is very, very difficult for the Kurds to go to become independent. At least in the term of Iraqi Kurdistan, you need at least to have and secure the support of one state. For example, if Kurdistan of Iraq to go and become independent, at least you need to have support from Turkey, and Turkey did not support that, for example, in 2017, and therefore, what all these states did, they closed the border, they put sanction on us, and the result of that, we lost like 40% of our land. The Iraqi state, attacked us. We became very weak. There was sanction on us. Our airports were closed. So it was a very hard, thing to do, a hard situation for us. So that's our reality, which is very, very difficult.
Now, you're saying that, initially the new Iraqi government after Saddam Hussein, it recognized the state and Saddam Hussein's responsibility for the Halabja attack, and there were even some efforts at restitutions and so forth. But what happened over time? Why hasn't all of this? How and at what point has it ultimately unraveled? And to what point, we know that Saddam Hussein avoided accountability for those events because he was put on trial for other things and quickly executed before it came to the trial. But why? But in terms of practical measures such as restitution and such as legal recognition of Kurdish rights, what stood in the way, especially with their constitution that was written with U.S. help?
Yes, per example, per the constitution, those areas that have suffered most from the former regime, there has to be more, for example, budgetary allocations for them, for development, and also for reconstruction as well. But a part of that, when it comes to accountability, after 2003, Saddam Hussein was captured, he was put, on trial, and unfortunately, he was tried and also executed for 148 people, and that was for the jail, because some people in the jail tried to assassinate Saddam Hussein in the past, and these were Shias, and Shias were very they were in control, and as a result of that, they wanted to kill and execute Saddam Hussein for that. And unfortunately, he avoided accountability for Halabja, and not just for Halabja, but for all the Kurdish, genocide as well, because we're talking about multiple, genocide campaigns from 1980s to 1988, and also Anfal genocide, 182,000 people were killed or disappeared, and no one knows where they are up to the moment. Most of them are unaccounted for. Saddam Hussein, avoided accountability for that. So, the Shias who were in power in the country, they took out, they executed him just for that 148 people. He was not put in trial for the rest of his crime, especially the Kurdish genocide, the Halabja genocide as well, which is a really not an unfortunate and also a stain on the justice just for Iraq, but for the Kurds, but also, in my view, for the global justice in general, because Saddam Hussein should have been tried for all his crimes, including the genocide, because that would have served the global justice in general. That would have served as a reminder for all these dictators and all of these people who are thinking of doing such a horrible thing, that there will be accountability, because there was no accountability really for Saddam Hussein. And even the current Iraqi state, which is, the inherited, the previous, state, so far has not done anything for Halabja in the term of restitution or reparation for the families. And, there are thousands of people who are suffering as the result of the 1988 chemical attack. They are dying. There are no medicine, there are no medical treatment or medical care for them. They are dying every year, and Iraq does not take responsibility for them. And no reparations. Iraq, even though the Iraqi transitional court at that time recognized the Kurdish genocide as genocide, all these massacres, but they have not done anything. They have not done any reparation, and the justification is that it was done by the former regime. That's how they try to avoid accountability. But these people have come to power, and Iraq is the continuity of the former state, and therefore they need to take responsibility for what this state has done, because it was not just one person who did all these horrible things against the Kurdish people. It was the whole state apparatus. It was the whole Iraqi army. It was not just one person. You are talking about hundreds of thousands of Iraqi troops, from simple soldiers all the way to the higher ranking Iraqi military state, the state institutions, the state revenue, the state agencies were used systematically to kill the Kurds. Therefore, Iraq as a sovereign state, it was a sovereign state. Therefore, it has to be held accountable. As Professor Michael Kelly said, you cannot put Iraq in prison, but you can make it to pay for it. And I think it should be, Iraq should be be made to pay for its crimes, because it's really important. We cannot make the debt come back at all, but I think it gives a sense of justice, and also recognition is really important. And this reparation just is a part of this recognition, also acknowledgement for all the crimes that they have done against the Kurdish people, and that brings a sense of relief for people, and also for the Kurds in general. Okay, this state probably is sincere about treating us, for the first time in its history, as equal citizens, because it acknowledges that it has wronged us, and it is sincere because, for example, it's ready to make reparations. But unless Iraq does that, it's very hard to see for us as Kurds that, Iraq really sincere to treat us, equally, or even if it has like good intention in the future, because I'm really not optimistic. I know many people think, okay, it's a new state, things are changing, the world is more open than before, but that is really not the case, because we are seeing all these horrible things that are happening in front of our eyes, even though we are sometimes seeing all this, even like, chemical attacks, for example, in the case of Syria, happened just a few years ago, live on social media. We are seeing like, people and babies get killed live on social media, live on TV, and still people seem to be so indifferent for all these horrible things. So I don't think Iraq as a state has changed it. The political culture is still there, the mentality is there, and a change requires generation, and that requires investment in basic education, and also exposure to the outside world. Change of the curriculum at the bottom, not from the top, and all of these things have not happened in Iraq, and therefore the society will reproduce the same politicians, the same political culture, because the structure is there, and also when these people are in power, they're just going to respond for the structure, for the system. They have no any choice. So therefore I'm really not optimistic, and the only probably hope I would have is for the international community or international forces to leave a small even footprint in Iraq, just to serve as a check on everyone, so that horrible things will not happen again in the country.
Has there been any effort to enforce restitutional claims through international legal institutions?
At the moment, there are especially I think the families of the victims in Halabja, they have been launching lawsuits against companies that have provided these lethal weapons to Iraq in the past. Especially I think again German, also some Dutch companies that provided, for example, gas and master gas and nerve gases to the Iraqi government. I think this is a process they are making progress, but also it's important for Kurds to take this to the ICJ, but unfortunately you need to be a state to take such cases to ICJ. Kurds are not the state, therefore they cannot take this, their genocide case to the ICJ. They need a state on their behalf to take it to the ICJ. And so far, no one has, showed their, to volunteer this on their behalf. For example, in the case of the Palestinians, South Africa, for example, they volunteered to do that. We need a friend. So far, no one has shown this willingness for us, for example, to take Iraq to the ICJ, because Iraq has signed to be part of this, the convention on genocide, and so are part of the ICJ as well. So therefore, Iraq can really be taken to the ICJ and made, pay reparation to the families of the ICJ, and that requires lobbying and also a very grand strategy and the vision by the Kurdish government. Unfortunately, we are too distracted to focus on that at the moment.
Now, that brings us to another issue, which is a security issue. As we know, parts of the Ba'ath Party essentially end up joining up with what is now known as ISIS, and US and the Kurdish Peshmerga, and also portions of the Iraqi military had over the years reduced their influence, although they did not completely eliminate them. In the last couple of years, we've seen some level of resurgence, and now there are talks about U.S. withdrawal of troops from the country. What do you think? What impact is that going to have on ISIS and on the Kurdish security as a result of that?
So, if history is any instructive, really, then, in 2011, we saw the drawdown of the U.S. troops. We saw, ascendancy of the Shia powers. They went after, the Sunni politicians and the Sunni population in the west of the country, and that led and triggered the Sunni population to join the extremist groups like Al-Qaeda, and the result of that led us to the rise of, ISIS, for example. And also in the term of the, Kurdish security, and if the American troops would withdraw, then you have, the Shia power supported by Iran and potentially others, and check it. And they are, at the moment, they are working, and so they have worked to undermine the Kurdish autonomy and also federalism in the country. They have used it, the revenue, as a weapon against the Kurdistan region. They are not paying the Kurdish, for example, the Kurdish government. They have stopped it through the court, the Kurdistan region, to export oil. And also they have used the court to penalize the Kurdistan region in every form possible. And this is very dangerous. That's why I say, when, as long as the US troops are there, or there's some sort of international military presence in Iraq, there's some sort of, guarantee for the future that these horrible things are not going to happen. But if there is no, then this is really a recipe for disaster, and such horrible things could happen again and again, not just to the Kurds, but also to the Sunnis as well, because you are going to have a Shia autocracy at the moment. And there are over 65% of the population. Now they control the court, they control the executive powers, and also they control the legislative power, because they managed to dismiss the Speaker of the Parliament, who was a Sunni, and now you have the deputy, who is a Shia, who is controlling the parliament as well. So they control everything. They control the military, they control the foreign relations, they control the whole state. And if you are not going to have this, foreign, guarantors, then Iraq will turn into a pariah state, and that will be very, very dangerous, not just for the Kurds and also for the Sunnis, but also for the neighbors as well, because Iraq has proven to be very, very dangerous historically for the regional, also for the international security, when there is an absence of check and balance on the central government. And now there's this tendency for re-centralization of power in Baghdad, and that's very, very, very dangerous.
One of the issues that are really not being covered all that much is what you mentioned, the dispute over the oil, over the ability for the Kurds to export their oil. And I understand that there's been numerous efforts to get the United States to mediate or to resolve this issue, but that has not happened. And has there been any explanation for why the US has not pushed to resolve that?
So this is the US has been trying to resolve it, but they don't want to push too much. First, and secondly, the US influence is really limited, because, as I mentioned, the government is controlled by forces that are hostile to the United States, to the U.S. interests. They are more aligned with, with one of the neighbors. They are more interested to have, ties and economic and energy ties with Russia and with China, not with the United States. And therefore they are just, rejecting any American mediation in this regard. That's why you have, the Chinese companies, dominating, the Iraqi, investment, the Iraqi market, for example. You have very little American, investment presence in Iraq at the moment. Even the American, energy companies have withdrawn from the rest of Iraq. You have the largest, presence of the American energy presence just in Kurdistan region, in fact. And now they have been under lots of pressure because of the Iraqi government pressures, because of the Iraqi Supreme Court decisions that have stopped Kurdistan region from exporting oil. But what Iraq wants is a complete disarmament of the Kurdistan region from its financial ability and capability. They don't want Kurdistan to be independent of Baghdad. They want for everything Kurdistan to depend on Baghdad, even though Kurdistan has agreed to give up on oil exportation and allow SOMO, which is a state marketing company, to to sell oil to the international bidders, to sell oil to the international market. But Iraq wants those companies, foreign companies who have invested in Kurdistan, to have their contract to be renegotiated, because at the moment, each barrel of oil that's produced in Kurdistan region is cost about $21, and in the rest of Iraq is about $8. And Iraq wanted that cost to be brought down to that of Iraq. But the problem is that the topography in Kurdistan is completely different. And also what you have in Kurdistan in the term of the format of type of the contracts are completely different from the rest of Iraq. And in Kurdistan, you have a production sharing company, contracts, and the rest of Iraq, you have a service contracts, where, for example, if you are an oil company working in oil fields in south of the country, for each barrel of oil you are, for example, producing, you are going to get only a fee or a service fee for the oil that you are pumping out. In the Kurdistan region is different. So you are more like a partner. So you are getting share of the oil that you are producing. Also, you are selling as well. But the problem is that in Kurdistan, the cost of operation is much higher because of topography, because the Kurdistan oil is not sweet, like, for example, Baghdad. The drilling and I said the geology and everything really factors in how Kurdistan regions oil costs are higher than the rest of Iraq. And plus because of the political risk and also all the legal risk, is that these energy companies in the past that they factored in, they just negotiated probably a higher, for example, price with the Kurdistan region, because they wanted to protect it themselves. But that's why you have again a higher cost compared to the rest of Iraq. But Iraq says, we want everything to be renegotiated. We want to see all these contracts, and that has been a non-starter, for the Kurdistan region, also for the oil company. The oil companies say, we want, these contracts cannot be renegotiated. They need to respect it as they are. And the question, and that has been, standing for quite a long time. And it has been over a year that the Kurdistan region has stopped or has been made stop to export oil for the international oil market. It has taken a financial toll not just on the Kurdistan region but also on the whole Kurdish population, also the economy as well because the KRG, the Kurdistan regional government, has not been able to pay its civil servant salaries, and also people have been demonstrating. People are not doing well. There are lots of political, social, and also economic problem as well. And obviously, Baghdad does not care, and they want that to continue. And also, they want to tell people and force, force the KRG to make more concessions to Baghdad because they want to use the social pressure in Kurdistan. Again, the Kurdistan regional government says that KRG would make more concession to Baghdad, and that's another way they are trying to undermine, also divide and rule, the Kurdistan region, unfortunately.
So what we are seeing, ironically, is that both strains of U.S. foreign policy establishment are acting against their own self-proclaimed interests. The security hawks in the region would do no better than supporting a moderate Kurdish government versus all these extremist forces, state and non-state actors hostile to U.S. Interests. The pro-democracy and pro-human rights crowd would do no better than enforce their own principles in Iraq and ensure that everyone has equal rights and compensation for past grievances. But both sides of it, ironically and very short-sightedly, are ultimately empowering and supporting authoritarian, anti-democratic, and violently oppressive voices that are also a threat directly to the U.S. and not just to the U.S. troops in Iraq, but to the larger Middle Eastern and global interests. So I'm not entirely sure how it came to be that seemingly differently motivated groups of foreign policy establishment are both failing with equal measure on this issue, and they don't see just how much of a completely wrong-headed and counterintuitive policy it is, but it's obviously tremendously detrimental, and understanding these failures also puts in perspective that these historic events of Saddam Hussein's chemical attacks cannot be separated from today's reality, current events, and policy by the supposedly new, supposedly different, Iraqi government that was brought to power by the United States and its allies. This is all quite ironic that from opposing Saddam Hussein's oppression, we ended up being for completely unfathomable and short-sighted reasons, we came to enable a different form of oppression by with a large dose of influence from our own adversaries in the region. I'm just shocked how this big picture is not really meeting with more public outrage.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. This just reminds me of Einstein's definition of insanity, doing something over and over and hoping for different results. And we have been investing in Baghdad and hoping that Iraq would be, Baghdad to be, more stable and stronger, and hoping that, we are going to have a more pro-American government in Baghdad. We are hoping, okay, this prime minister will be more pro-American. And we are just, for whatever reason, overlooking all these realities on the ground. For the last 20 years, we are hoping Iraq would get better and better. And we are hoping okay, this government would be more pro-American, would be less hostile to American interests in the country. But with each government, you have a more hostile government towards American. You have more anti-American factions in Iraq taking power. They are more consolidating their power base politically, also militarily. But we are still, for whatever reason, we are still in love with Baghdad. We are still punishing our friends. We're still rewarding our adversaries. this is like something I really cannot like reconcile these like wandering in our policy, in our foreign policy, why we are not investing in our real friends, in our real partners, and also try to use like what they call the stick and reward policy towards our friends and also adversaries. Because look, in the last 2 years there has been 187 attacks against the US troops in Iraq and Syria, and all of this have been done by the Shia militia forces. It was not done by the Kurds or by the Sunnis, by the Shia forces. Still, we go back to Iraq. Still, we want to invest in the Iraqi government. And the Iraqi government is formed by who? By exactly the same people who are attacking our troops. So this is just a very, very strange policy that we're holding and also we're pursuing that goes exactly against our own self-interest, which is very, very strange. I find it puzzling. I cannot analyze it. I cannot understand it at all. And I don't understand, what the rationale, our focus have at the, national security level for this, for pursuing or prescribing this kind of policies. I understand, Kurdistan region has lots of problems, but of course, okay, the Kurds are divided, but so do the Americans, so do the Europeans, so do the Iraqis. No one is united at the moment, when it comes to politics. And also, it's the sense of abandonment, also the sense of the American leadership, and also a sense